Thank you very much, if you allow me. First of all, I would like to greet everyone back home in Slovakia, from here in Tirana, the capital of Albania, where the European Political Community meeting is taking place. I would like to ask everyone to perceive this meeting, above all, as a platform for the exchange of views between practically all European countries, regardless of whether they are member states of the European Union or not, and at the same time as a platform that enables a whole series of important bilateral meetings. Summits of this type do not adopt any binding conclusions. However, I can state that, as is understandable, such a summit is primarily focused on the security issues of the war in Ukraine. We are all waiting for some information regarding the negotiations in Istanbul. We talked about the future of the European Union. It is more of a visionary platform where the countries of the European Union that are members and the countries that want to join the European Union say how they imagine the future of Europe. I have used this platform, ladies and gentlemen, for bilateral meetings. I would start with the first bilateral meeting, which I had with the Spanish Prime Minister, Mr. Sanchez. Spain is a country that imports a relatively large volume of liquefied gas from the Russian Federation, but through private companies. I addressed the Spanish Prime Minister because a certain group of countries is emerging within the European Union that has serious reservations about the European Commission's strategy, which is to lead to a complete halt in the supply of gas, oil, and nuclear materials from the Russian Federation to Europe. I have already spoken on this topic repeatedly, and I will remind you again that I consider this material from the European Commission to be ideologically, politically, and economically harmful. Because it will lead to an increase in energy prices in Europe, it will lead to a decrease in competitiveness, and above all, it will cause great complications for many countries. If someone thinks that we can just replace nuclear fuel and we will insert some fuel from other regions of the world into Russian reactors, that it will work, then they are very mistaken. We had a meeting of the Security Council, where it was stated that test operation with gas fuel sometimes lasts several years. That is why I am representing the countries that have a problem with this plan, and since I see the volumes that private companies in Spain are taking in terms of Russian liquefied gas, I contacted the Prime Minister. We agreed, because he himself acknowledged that everyone is waiting to see what the legislative proposals will look like, that we will prepare on an expert basis, analyze what is currently available, the information that we have, and then we will all fully concentrate on preparing the legislative acts that are to bring this ban on the import of gas, oil, and nuclear materials into effect, and we will have the opportunity to participate in them as part of this process. So, that was the first important bilateral meeting concerning the energy and nuclear security of the Slovak Republic, and I am trying to find partners. I agreed with the Spanish Prime Minister that at the turn of June and July, I would come to Spain for an important international conference, a summit that is being organized in Spain, and we also discussed a few other details from bilateral relations. The second meeting that I attended was perhaps even more interesting because I requested a meeting with the EU High Representative for Foreign Policy, Ms. Kaja Kallasova. And I returned to the ping-pong, as I called it, at this meeting, where we exchanged certain positions from the perspective of my visit to the Russian Federation. At this meeting, I told the High Representative that there is no legal document, there are no binding political positions within the EU that would prevent me from choosing the goals of my foreign visits, and at the same time, the way I behave on these foreign trips at my own will. Come on, where Moscow was concerned. I do not want to return to it specifically, because my duty was to pay respect to the 60,000 victims of the Red Army in the personification of Slovakia, and then I used Moscow for 4 important bilateral negotiations with the Chinese president, the Brazilian president, the Russian president, and with the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. I indicated and told the High Representative that I am a sovereign prime minister of a sovereign country, and that rather than such exchanges of political views, we would benefit more from cooperation. Yes, Mrs. Kallasova and I have fundamentally different views on many things. We certainly have completely different views on the war in Ukraine. We certainly have a different opinion about the Iron Curtain that the European Union is so honestly building in relation to the Russian Federation. We certainly have a different opinion about the material that I mentioned in connection with the Spanish Prime Minister, repowering, that is, stopping the flow of gas, oil, and nuclear materials. But we are a member state of the European Union. This is our living space. So even if we have some fundamental disagreements, we must be able to cooperate. So I suggested that we stop criticizing each other's political positions. Let's respect each other. I will respect that there is a member of the European Commission who is responsible for foreign policy. I expect that the European Commission will respect the sovereign positions of the Slovak government, our sovereign Slovak foreign policy, oriented towards all four corners of the world, and I offered that we should rather use these initiatives of mine to inform each other. For example, I said that in the second half of this year I would like to visit Vietnam, which is also a very important destination for the European Union. So it would be better to exchange some political positions. If I communicate with the Vice President of the European Commission's department before the trip, we will go over what the European positions are, what I could present. On the other hand, I will inform this section of the European Commission about the conclusions reached on this journey. I also spoke about my interest in upsetting Cuba, which is also a country of interest for the European Commission. I invited Mrs. Kolesova to a joint meeting or a joint session of the Slovak and Ukrainian governments. It is a meeting that we would recommend organizing at some point. The tradition has been somewhat interrupted because in December, President Zelensky made a serious decision to stop any transit of Russian gas through the territory of Ukraine. But we are still trying to initiate a meeting with the Ukrainian side because there are good civilian projects here, such as an electrical connection, a direct railway connection, the restoration of border crossings. Therefore, I think that at such an important meeting, which we managed to organize, the Vice President of the European Commission could be present. So, as the Prime Minister of a country that is in the European Union, I offer mutual understanding and respect, but at the same time I ask that our sovereign positions, on which foreign policy is built, be fully respected and not commented on in any way. Gentlemen, I am faced with a new initiative within this region, where there are countries such as Georgia, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, and others that are pushing to create some kind of mix of countries that are not in the European Union, but are interested in joining the European Union as quickly as possible, and countries that are there and have some experience of the accession process, so that we can talk together about the topics that are currently resonating, namely sovereignty, identity, national parliaments. I'm not opposed to the possibility that something like this could happen if we manage to prepare a good model for such cooperation. We still want to impress, ladies and gentlemen, a meeting with the Italian Prime Minister, because a specific date for my official visit to Rome is on the table. I want to go over the agenda with her very quickly, how it could all look. I think that I agree with the Italian Prime Minister on many things. This trip is very, very important and significant from my point of view. In addition to the plenary session, where we were all present, I repeat that practically all European countries. I'm glad to see the Turkish President, Mr. Erdogan, here. There are other important countries here that are not in the EU, but that are cooperating from the EU. There were also meetings and so-called panels. I attended a panel that was chaired by the British Prime Minister together with the Swedish Prime Minister. The President of the European Parliament was there. The Prime Minister of Luxembourg was there. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands was there. There were representatives from Georgia, Estonia. I can't even remember. There were about 10 people there. On this panel, I spoke about the issue of Ukraine, where I confirmed that I have never believed in a military solution to this conflict, and that even during my visit to Moscow on May 9th, I asked constantly and repeatedly about the premiers, whether one way or another. I think it is right to share with the indifferent. And the indifferent from my side is that Putin enjoys enormous public support in the Russian Federation. Practically the entire country stands behind him. So there is no need to imply that if someone here is trying to create the image that something is happening in this country, it is not true. There is almost 100% support from the Russian president. And we also addressed issues of cooperation between the governments of the Slovak Republic and the UK. You know that there are thousands of Ukrainians in Slovakia who live and work here. There are special programs that help them. We have a program from the three governments that have already passed in terms of the electricity interconnection and railway interconnection projects. We would like to organize another government. And I said that we reject the supply of weapons as gifts, but we are ready to cooperate with Ukraine on a commercial basis, which is of course happening to a certain extent. That was my speech. The Estonian Prime Minister was there too, but I bit my tongue, as they say. I forgave myself for the remark I had to make that between partners, countries that are together in the EU and NATO, there is no such thing as someone not allowing you to fly over the territory of their country. They probably thought I would get scared and skip the brainstorming session, but we had alternative plans. But maybe I'll do it privately. I'll do it at a forum where there were 10 prime ministers. There were presidents. But if I meet him now, I'll tell him privately that such things simply don't happen between EU partners. Nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, what a difficult week it has been. And for me, yesterday was an extremely difficult day, not in terms of emotions. I'm talking about the fact that since morning, we have been going like chainsaws. Safety is a tool. I then negotiated with a high delegation of the Communist Party of China. Then we had a performance at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. From there we ran to the government building, to the government press conference. After the press conference, I still had to organize myself and make a big performance in front of a crowd of our sympathizers in the sports hall. I thought it would be very difficult today, after the difficult week we've had, but I'm glad we thought about it. Because those informal meetings have a huge charm, it's enough if you meet for 2 minutes. Alexander Vučić is here, my friend from Serbia. I've met with many other prime ministers. Sometimes it's enough to exchange 2 or 3 words. I spoke with Andrej Plenković because I recently visited Croatia. We stopped at the Armenians because we are going to piss off the Armenians in a short time. This trip was meaningful in any case. As I announced, I use these platforms to communicate openly and directly on behalf of the Slovak Republic with my partners who are in the European Union with us, but also with countries that are not in the European Union. So much for today's trip. If you have 1 or 2 questions on the topic, please, because we want to catch up with the Prime Minister of Italy, who is looking for us somewhere, to the detriment of everything.